November 27th, 1934, 3:15 in the afternoon. A quiet road near Barrington, Illinois. A man steps out from behind a disabled Ford. He's 5'4", blue eyes, a face like a choir boy, and there's a .45 caliber slug buried in his abdomen, tearing through his liver and pancreas. 2 federal agents crouch behind a Hudson sedan 100 feet away. One has a Thompson submachine gun, the other a 12-gauge shotgun. They open fire. He doesn't run. He doesn't take cover. He walks toward them, firing as he advances. 8 shotgun pellets rip into his legs. He falls. He gets back up. He keeps walking. He kills them both. More than a dozen witnesses watch in disbelief. His wife lies flat in a ditch, listening to the gunfire. By nightfall, he'll be dead. But so will the 2 men sent to stop him. But this moment, this impossible suicidal charge, didn't come from nowhere. It was the end of a 25-year journey, from Chicago's slums to public enemy number 1. A boy too violent for Al Capone, a partner too reckless for John Dillinger, the only man in American history to kill 3 FBI agents. This is how Lester Gillis, babyface Nelson, became more feared than Dillinger or Capone, and why his violence, not Dillinger's charm, built the modern FBI. Lester Joseph Gillis was born December 6th, 1908, in a Chicago neighborhood called The Patch. It wasn't a place that made soft men. Freight yards on one side, stockyards on the other, factories belching smoke into a grey sky, the smell of cattle and industry and poverty hanging over everything. His father, Joseph Gillis, was a Belgian immigrant who worked as a tanner. His mother, Marie Duget, also Belgian-born, tutored neighbourhood children in French to help pay the bills. Lester was the youngest of 7 children. He was also the only Gillis child who would ever turn to crime. The physical details that would define his life were already apparent. 5 feet 4 inches tall, 133 pounds, bright blue eyes, a smooth, boyish face that witnesses would later describe as looking like an angel. The face of a choir boy, the soul of something else entirely. His first arrest came on July 4th, 1921. He was 12 years old. He'd found a pistol and accidentally shot a playmate in the jaw. They sent him to a state reformatory for over a year. School records from the time describe a boy of average intelligence but explosive temper, constantly fighting classmates, unable to control his rage. Then came the moment that broke something inside him. Christmas Eve, 1924. His father, Joseph, committed suicide. Lester was 16, already locked up in reform school when he got the news. He reportedly blamed himself, and from that point forward he began funneling stolen money back to his mother and siblings, as if he could pay off his guilt with cash, as if crime could be an act of love. The pattern was already set. By 13 he was arrested again. Car theft this time. 18 months at the St. Charles School for Boys. By 14, he was running his own operation. A tyre theft ring called the Strippers, working out of a Standard Oil station that doubled as their headquarters. He left school after 8th grade. What was the point? He'd already found his profession. It was around this time that his crew started calling him Baby Face. He hated it. The nickname came from the obvious disconnect. That smooth, innocent face attached to a kid who'd shoot you without hesitation. Fellow gang members thought it was funny. Lester didn't. He preferred Big George Nelson. Note the deliberate compensatory adjective. Or just Jimmy. Anything but baby face. Years later, Homer Van Meter would taunt him with the name during a card game. Nelson's response was immediate. "Don't call me that, I hate that name." And Van Meter, who was no coward, never said it again. But the nickname stuck because it captured something true. The radical disconnect between what he looked like and what he was. Bank tellers would see him walk through the door and mistake him for a teenage messenger, a delivery boy, someone's kid brother running an errand. Then he'd pull the gun, and they'd realise the angel face belonged to someone who would kill them without a second thought. That gap between appearance and reality, between the choir boy and the killer, would define his entire criminal career. People kept underestimating him. They kept paying for it. This was late 1920s Chicago. Prohibition had turned organized crime into the biggest business in the city. Al Capone's empire dominated everything. The politicians, the police, the unions, the speakeasies. Money flowed like beer from an illegal tap. And for a young man with no education, no prospects, and no fear, the path forward was obvious. Nelson graduated from petty theft to labor racketeering to armed robbery. Each step bloodier than the last. Each step paying better than anything legitimate work could offer. Somewhere in the middle of all this, in 1928, he met a girl. Helen Wozniak worked the counter at a Woolworth store. She was petite, Polish, and almost exactly his age, born March 23, 1908. They met at the gas station where Nelson worked his stolen tyre operation. Her family objected strongly. They could see what he was. She married him anyway, late 1928 or early 1929, under his legal name Gillis. They had 2 children, Ronald Vincent and Darlene Helen. And Helen would stay with him through everything that followed, the bank robberies, the shootouts, the years on the run. She would hold his hand as he died. She would never remarry. Some people wondered why. But what hold did this violent little man have over her? In a rare interview decades later, she offered the only explanation she'd ever give. "I loved Les. When you love a guy, you love him. That's all there is to it." From that point forward, Nelson's violence would escalate in distinct phases, each one more brutal than the last, each one pushing him closer to a title no one wanted to inherit, and no one would survive. By 1929, Nelson had graduated from petty theft to something far more dangerous. He became an enforcer for Al Capone's organization. Think about that for a moment. Al Capone, the man who ordered the St. Valentine's Day massacre, the most powerful crime boss in America, and he hired a 20-year-old with a baby face to intimidate union leaders. Nelson's job was simple: make people comply. His tools were knives and revolvers, Thompson submachine guns, baseball bats, whatever worked. And for a while it did work. Nelson was effective, terrifyingly effective. But then something unprecedented happened. Al Capone fired him. Not for stealing, not for disloyalty, for being too violent. So that Nelson was killing and maiming union figures that Capone needed alive. He couldn't control himself. He'd go to intimidate someone and end up putting them in the morgue. And even a man who'd ordered 7 people machine-gunned in a garage on Valentine's Day decided this kid was too much. Too brutal for Capone. It's a distinction almost without parallel in organised crime history. So Nelson formed his own crew. They called themselves the Tape Bandits, named for their habit of binding victims with adhesive tape during home invasions. The hauls were impressive. January 6th, 1930, $205,000 in jewellery from the Charles Richter residence. That's nearly $4 million in today's money from one job. On October 6th, 1930, they robbed the wife of Chicago Mayor Big Bill Thompson. She's the one who gave reporters the quote that would follow him forever. He had a baby face. He was good-looking, hardly more than a boy. The banks came next. April 21st, 1930, his first bank job, roughly $4,000. October 3rd, the Itasca State Bank, 4,600. Small scores, practice runs. Then on November 26th, 1930, Nelson committed his first documented murder. A tavern robbery gone wrong. Stockbroker Edwin R. Thompson shot dead. No hesitation, no remorse. The pattern was set, and it would only accelerate. High winter of 1931, the law finally caught up with him. Nelson was arrested and sentenced to 1 year to life at the Illinois State Penitentiary at Joliet. For most men, that would have been the end of the story. Nelson wasn't most men. February 17th, 1932. He was being transported back from a trial in Wheaton. The prison car had already left, so they put him in a taxicab with a single guard. Somewhere along the route, Nelson produced a handgun. It had been smuggled to him, likely planted by Helen in a train station washroom, though no one ever proved it. He pointed the gun at his guard's face. His words were calm, almost polite. "Don't give me a reason to kill you." The guard didn't. Nelson ordered both the guard and the driver out of the car. Then he drove away. He was never recaptured. He fled west at Reno first, then Sausalito, California. And it was there, on the fog-shrouded coast, that he met the man who would become his most loyal associate, John Paul Chase, a bootlegger. Born December 26, 1901. 7 years older than Nelson, but willing to follow him anywhere. Chase introduced Nelson to people as his half-brother. Nelson taught Chase how to handle a Thompson submachine gun on the deserted beach at Point Reyes. The waves crashing, the gulls screaming, two men practicing for war. Through underworld connections at the Green Lantern Tavern in St. Paul, Minnesota, Nelson recruited more men. Homer Van Meter, Tommy Carroll, Eddie Green. These weren't just gang members, they were the bridge to something bigger. Something that would make Nelson's name synonymous with the most famous bank robber in America. But first, he needed to prove himself. August 18th, 1933, People's Savings Bank in Grand Haven, Michigan. $2,300. A warm-up. October 23rd, 1933, First National Bank of Brainerd, Minnesota. $32,000. That's nearly $800,000 today. It was the Brainerd job that revealed who Nelson really was. During the getaway, witnesses reported that he wildly sprayed submachine gun bullets at bystanders on the street. Not at cops, not at anyone chasing them, just people walking, shopping, living their lives. There was no tactical purpose, no reason, just pure, purposeless terror. Because he could, because he wanted to. March 3rd, 1934. John Dillinger made his famous escape from the Crown Point, Indiana jail, supposedly using a wooden pistol he'd carved and blackened with shoe polish. The story made headlines across the country, but what the newspapers didn't report was who had arranged and financed the escape. Nelson's men. Van Meter, Carroll, Green, they'd set the whole thing up. And now the two most dangerous bank robbers in America were about to join forces. The combined group, what the FBI would call the Second Dillinger Gang, was less a hierarchy than a volatile partnership. Two alphas in one pack. Dillinger was the star, the face, the name everyone knew. Nelson was the firepower, and he made his position clear from the start. At their first meeting, Nelson reportedly declared, "I don't take no orders. I walk into a bank, open fire, kill anything that moves, and I grab the money and I'm out of there." The robberies that followed were devastating in both scale and violence. March 6th, 1934. Security National Bank, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. $49,500 stolen, over $1 million in today's money. During the robbery, Nelson spotted motorcycle officer Hale Keith arriving outside. Without hesitation, he opened fire through a plate glass window with his submachine gun. Keith went down, severely wounded. Nelson shouted to his partners, "I got one of them. That'll teach him to interfere." They used 30 hostages as human shields during the escape, scattered roofing nails behind their getaway car to shred the tires of any pursuers. March 13th, First National Bank, Mason City, Iowa. $52,000, $1.22 million today. Wham, this one went worse. Dillinger and John Red Hamilton were both shot and wounded during the escape. A bystander named H.C. Kunkelman captured rare film footage of the robbery, evidence of what they'd become. June 30th, Merchants National Bank, South Bend, Indiana. $28,000, their last confirmed robbery as a unit. Nelson took a bullet to the chest, but his bulletproof vest saved him. A local jeweler and a teenager actually fought him hand to hand on the street. He still got away. But the partnership was fracturing. The FBI's own assessment would later note, eventually even Dillinger refused to rob banks with him. Dillinger cultivated a charismatic gentleman bandit image. He'd walk into a bank and say, "Now nobody get nervous, you ain't got nothing to fear." He wanted the money. He didn't want the blood. And Nelson wanted both. Author J. Robert Nash put it bluntly. Where outlaws such as Pretty Boy Floyd and the Barkers would kill to protect themselves when cornered, Nelson went out of his way to murder. He loved it. Too violent for Capone, too reckless for Dillinger. There was no one left who could control him. April 20th, 1934. The gang arrived at Little Bohemia Lodge, a secluded resort in Manitowish Waters, Wisconsin. They needed rest. Dillinger, Nelson, Van Meter, Carroll, Hamilton, and their women, including Helen, checked in for what was supposed to be a quiet weekend. But lodge owner Emil Wanatka recognized Dillinger, saw the concealed pistol during a poker game, grew alarmed. On April 21st, his wife Nan slipped a note to her brother-in-law. The brother-in-law called the U.S. Marshal's office. The Marshal called the FBI special agent in charge. Melvin Purvis scrambled agents from Chicago and St. Paul. They flew to Rhinelander, Wisconsin, borrowed cars, drove to the lodge with headlights off. By approximately 8 p.m. on April 22nd, they were in position. And then everything went wrong. The lodge dog started barking. At the same moment, 3 innocent customers, John Hoffman, Eugene Boineau, and John Morris, walked out the front door, got in their car, turned on the radio and started to drive away. Agents shouted, "Federal agents, stop!" The men couldn't hear over their radio. The agents opened fire. 24-year-old Eugene Boineau, a civilian conservation corps worker who had nothing to do with any of this, was killed instantly. Hoffman and Morris were wounded. Innocent men shot by federal agents who just announced their presence to every gangster inside. The gang returned fire from upstairs windows. Then they ran out the back. Assistant Director Hugh Clegg had failed to post agents at the rear of the lodge. He'd wrongly assumed the lake was impassable. Dillinger, Van Meter, Hamilton and Carroll fled along the lakeside, stole a car a mile away, and vanished. Every single gangster escaped unharmed. Nelson's escape was different. He fled into the woods alone, emerged 90 minutes later, kidnapped a local couple, seized more hostages at the home of a switchboard operator named Alvin Kerner. Then a car pulled up carrying 3 lawmen, FBI Agent W. Carter Boehm, Agent J. Newman, and Constable Carl Christensen. Nelson opened fire without a word. 3 shots to Agent Baum's neck. Dead. When his safety catch was still engaged, he never got off a shot. Newman took a bullet to the head but survived. Christensen was hit 9 times but survived. Nelson stole the FBI car and disappeared into the Wisconsin wilderness. The aftermath was catastrophic. For the FBI, all gangsters escaped, an innocent civilian killed by agents, 2 more wounded, 1 agent dead, nothing achieved. Calls for Hoover's resignation echoed through Congress and the press, but Hoover, ever the opportunist, turned catastrophe into ammunition. He used Little Bohemia to argue for expanded federal law enforcement powers. And on May 18, 1934, President Roosevelt signed sweeping new crime legislation. The FBI's worst failure became the foundation for its future power. July 22nd, 1934. So John Dillinger walked out of the Biograph Theatre in Chicago after watching a Clark Gable movie. Federal agents were waiting. They shot him down in the alley. The most famous bank robber in America was dead at 31. The title of Public Enemy No. 1 passed to Pretty Boy Floyd. October 22, 1934. Agents tracked Floyd to a farm field in East Liverpool, Ohio. He tried to run. They shot him in the back. He died 15 minutes later, cursing the men who killed him. The title passed again. And this time, it landed on babyface Nelson. Late October, 1934. The FBI made it official. The 5'4" killer with the choir boy face was now the most wanted man in America. Public enemy number one. The last of the three men who would hold that title in 1934. The only one still breathing. Hoover assigned Inspector Samuel Cowley specifically to lead the hunt. Cowley was everything Nelson wasn't. A university-educated lawyer, a devout Mormon, a man Hoover had personally groomed for leadership. His mission was simple: find Nelson and end him. Agents maintained surveillance on every known hideout. A 3-week stakeout at the Lake Como Inn in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Wiretaps, informants, the full weight of the federal government bearing down on one man. Through November, Nelson, Helen and Chase moved constantly between safe houses, never staying anywhere more than a few days, always looking over their shoulders, always armed. The net was closing. Every law enforcement agency in the Midwest was watching for them. Local cops, state police, federal agents, all of them hunting the same target. Nelson knew it couldn't last. He'd seen what happened to Dillinger. He'd seen what happened to Floyd. Ambushed, surprised, shot down before they could fight back. He had to know his turn was coming. But babyface Nelson wasn't going to die like that. Not surprised, not ambushed, not shot in the back. When his moment came, he would face it head on. But on November 27th, 1934, near a quiet Illinois suburb, babyface Nelson would make the choice that defined him. Not to flee, not to surrender, to walk directly into the guns. November 27th, 1934, early afternoon. Nelson, Helen and Chase drove back to the Lake Como Inn in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. They'd been there before. It was supposed to be safe. It wasn't. As they pulled up, they came face to face with FBI agents James Metcalf and Charles Winstead. The agents were just as surprised as Nelson. For a frozen moment, everyone stared. Then Nelson hit the gas and sped away before either side could fire a shot. Around 3 p.m., heading south on US Route 14, Nelson spotted another car. Agents Thomas McDade and William Ryan travelling in the opposite direction. Both parties recognized each other at the same instant. What followed was chaos. A series of U-turns on a rural highway, cars wheeling around trying to get position. And then something strange happened. Nelson stopped running. He started chasing. The hunter became the hunted. Nelson's Ford pursued the FBI car down the highway. Chase leaned out the window with an automatic rifle and put 5 rounds into the agent's vehicle. McDade and Ryan returned fire. One of Agent Ryan's shots punched through Nelson's radiator. Another hit the water pump. Nelson didn't know it yet, but his car was dying. The Ford began overheating, losing power, steam rising from under the hood. Near Barrington, Illinois, Nelson realized he wasn't going to outrun anyone. Not in this car. Then he saw them in his mirror. A Hudson sedan closing fast. Behind the wheel, Agent Herman Hollis. In the passenger seat, Inspector Samuel Cowley. The man Hoover had personally assigned to hunt him down. Nelson pulled his crippled Ford to a stop at the entrance to Northside Park. He wasn't running anymore. He couldn't. The chase was over. Now came the fight. Hollis and Cowley overshot Nelson's position by about 100 feet. They stopped, got out, took cover behind their Hudson. And Cowley had a Thompson submachine gun with a 50-round drum magazine. Hollis carried a 12-gauge riot shotgun. 2 experienced federal agents. Heavy firepower, good cover. Nelson had a jammed weapon and a dying car. He told Helen to get down, take cover in the ditch. She dropped into the field and lay flat, face pressed to the cold November earth, listening to what came next. Both sides opened fire at the same moment. A .45 caliber slug from Cowley's Thompson struck Nelson in the lower abdomen. It tore through his liver, sliced through his pancreas, the kind of wound that kills you in hours, not minutes. Nelson staggered, grabbed the Ford's running board to keep from falling, blood spreading beneath his shirt. He should have gone down. Any normal man would have gone down. Nelson turned to Chase. His weapon had jammed, but he needed something that worked. Chase handed him a .351 Winchester automatic rifle. Nelson took it. steadied himself, and then he did the thing that would define him forever. He stepped out from behind the car and he started walking directly toward the two armed federal agents. Firing as he advanced, Cowley dove into a ditch. Nelson's rifle rounds tore into him. Hollis fired his shotgun. 8 buckshot pellets ripped into Nelson's legs. The impact knocked him off his feet. He got back up. Hollis fired again. Click! Empty. He retreated behind a utility pole, fumbling for his service pistol. He never got the chance to use it. Nelson shot him in the head. More than a dozen witnesses watched from nearby houses and cars. None of them could believe what they were seeing. A small man with a baby face, bleeding from 9 wounds, walking forward into gunfire until both federal agents were down. Nelson walked over to Hollis's body, checked to make sure he was dead. Then he signaled to chase. They had to move. Together, they transferred their arsenal from the ruined Ford to the agent's Hudson. 2 machine guns, 4 rifles, ammunition. Nelson collapsed into the back seat. Chase got behind the wheel. Helen climbed in beside her husband. Chase drove. Nelson knew it was over. The bullet in his gut had seen to that. He looked at Helen. "I'm done for." Chase drove to a safe house at 1627 Walnut Street in Niles Center, a suburb that would later be renamed Wilmette. They carried Nelson inside, laid him on a bed. At 7:35 p.m., Lester Joseph Gillis died. Helen was holding his hand. He was 25 years old. While she wrapped his body in a Native American pattern blanket. Years later, she would explain why. He always hated being cold. Chase stripped the body of identification. That night he drove to St. Paul's Lutheran Cemetery in Skokie and left the corpse in a roadside ditch. The next morning, telephone company worker Carl Feary found it while checking the lines. The FBI had their man. What was left of him? Inspector Samuel Cowley didn't die at the scene. He held on through the night, bleeding from the wounds Nelson had inflicted. At 2:20 a.m. on November 28th at Sherman Hospital in Elgin, Illinois, he finally let go. His last words were to Melvin Purvis, the agent who led the hunts for Dillinger and Floyd. Cowley's voice was barely a whisper. Nothing would bring him down. Nothing would bring him down. I think about what Cowley witnessed. He hit Nelson with a .45 caliber round to the gut, a shot that should have ended any fight instantly, and Nelson kept coming. Hollis put 8 shotgun pellets into his legs, and Nelson kept coming. 9 bullets in his body, and he walked forward until both agents were dead. That's not normal. That's not survival instinct. That's something else entirely. Nelson wasn't killed because of a betrayal. No informant sold him out. He wasn't ambushed like Dillinger outside the Biograph, shot in the back of the head before he could draw his gun. He wasn't surrounded like Pretty Boy Floyd in that Ohio farm field, running through the corn until the bullets caught up. Nelson died because he chose to charge. He saw 2 federal agents with superior firepower and good cover. He was already gut-shot, already dying. And instead of surrendering, instead of trying to escape, he walked into the guns. The only public enemy number 1 who died fighting. The others were surprised, ambushed, caught off guard. Nelson looked at death and walked toward it. And in doing so, he set a record that stands to this day. 3 FBI agents killed by 1 man. W. Carter Baum at Little Bohemia, Herman Hollis at Barrington, Samuel Cowley at Barrington. No one in American history has matched it. The FBI confirms the record still stands. Nearly a century later. 3 agents. 1 man, a 5'4" killer who wouldn't stop moving forward. What drives a man to walk into gunfire he knows will kill him? Tell me in the comments. But the story didn't end with Nelson's body in that ditch. His death would transform the people he left behind. And it would transform the FBI into something Hoover had always dreamed of. Helen Gillis was alone. Her husband was dead. His body dumped in a ditch, and every federal agent in the Midwest was hunting for her. She wandered Chicago streets for 2 days, a fugitive a widow, 26 years old with 2 children she might never see again. J. Edgar Hoover issued an order regarding her capture. Find the woman and give her no quarter. Newspapers interpreted this as a death order. Headlines screamed that Helen Gillis was now America's first female public enemy. The wife of babyface Nelson, wanted dead or alive. On Thanksgiving Day, November 29th, 1934, Helen surrendered. She couldn't run anymore, didn't want to, and she was charged with violating parole and sentenced to 1 year and 1 day at the Women's Federal Reformatory in Milan, Michigan. She served her time, was released in September 1935, returned to Chicago, and then she disappeared. Not literally, she just stopped being news, stopped being the wife of babyface Nelson, became Helen Gillis again. A quiet woman living a quiet life. She never remarried. In rare interviews over the decades that followed, she offered only one explanation for her devotion. I loved Les. When you love a guy, you love him. That's all there is to it. Helen died on July 3rd, 1987, from a cerebral hemorrhage. She was buried in the Gillis family plot, right next to Les. Their children, Ronald and Darlene, were raised by Nelson's sister, Juliet Fitzsimmons. They grew up under the Gillis surname, far from their father's infamy. They lived quiet lives, the kind of lives their father never could. John Paul Chase ran. After dumping Nelson's body, he fled west, back to California, back to the place where he'd first met the man who would ruin his life. For a month, he stayed hidden, working at a fish hatchery near Mount Shasta, trying to disappear. On December 27th, 1934, the FBI found him. Chase became a legal landmark. He was the first person ever tried under the new federal law making it a crime to kill a government agent. Nelson's violence had created the very statute that would imprison his best friend. The trial was swift. Found guilty on March 25th, 1935, the jury recommended mercy, which spared him the electric chair. Now instead, life imprisonment. They sent him to Alcatraz, prisoner AZ-238, The Rock, the most brutal federal prison in America. And there, something unexpected happened. Chase discovered he could paint. Behind those grey walls, surrounded by the worst criminals in the country, he became an accomplished artist, a talent no one, least of all Chase himself, knew he possessed. He was transferred to Leavenworth in 1954, finally paroled on October 31st, 1966. 31 years behind bars, more than half his life. He got a job as a janitor in California, mopped floors, emptied trash cans. The man who'd fired an automatic rifle at federal agents who'd driven the getaway car at the Battle of Barrington spent his final years cleaning up after other people. A reporter once asked him about the sentence, and Chase's answer was bleak. I think I'd rather dangle. He would have preferred the execution. John Paul Chase died of cancer on October 5th, 1973 in Palo Alto. He was 71 years old. Consider the body count of 1934. John Dillinger, killed July 22nd. Pretty Boy Floyd, killed October 22nd. Babyface Nelson, killed November 27th. 3 public enemies, number 1, dead within 5 months of each other. Hoover declared the end of the gangster era. And he wasn't wrong. The age of the celebrity bank robber, the charismatic outlaw, the folk hero criminal, it was over. The FBI had killed it. But what rose from those deaths was something new. Chase's prosecution established the legal precedent for federal agent murder charges. But the National Bank Robbery Act of 1934 gave federal authorities broader interstate pursuit powers. The FBI's Crime Records Section was created in 1935, a dedicated public relations unit to amplify Hoover's crime-fighting narrative. Hollywood followed. Jimmy Cagney's G-Men hit theaters in 1935 and launched a wave of films celebrating federal agents as heroes. New censorship rules ensured that gangsters could only appear on screen if they were being captured or killed. The mythology was complete, but there was an irony buried in all of it. Melvin Purvis, the agent who received public credit for the Dillinger, Floyd and Nelson cases, became a celebrity. Magazine covers, radio interviews, the face of the FBI's triumph. Hoover couldn't stand it. He drove Purvis out of the bureau through systematic harassment, blocked his career, made his life miserable. The man who'd caught 3 public enemies was forced to resign in 1935. Purvis died in 1960 from a gunshot wound ruled a probable suicide. Some said it was with the same gun Dillinger had surrendered at Crown Point. Others disputed that. Either way, the man who'd hunted Nelson died nearly as violently as Nelson himself. And the institution survived, grew, became the FBI we know today. Not because of Dillinger's charm or his wooden pistol escape, because of Nelson's violence. Because 3 dead agents gave Hoover everything he needed to build his empire. Ask most people about the gangsters of the 1930s and they'll name John Dillinger first. The charismatic outlaw, the gentleman bandit, and the man Johnny Depp played in Public Enemies. Dillinger gets the movies, the books, the romanticised legend. Nelson gets something else. He's the cautionary figure, the one who went too far. The man too violent for Al Capone, too reckless for John Dillinger, the psychopath who charged into federal gunfire with 9 bullets in him and kept killing until he physically couldn't anymore. There's a reason one story gets told as adventure and the other as horror. But Nelson's story reveals something that Dillinger's doesn't, something about the nature of power and its limits. Proximity to power was never the same as having power. Nelson was never the leader, always the volatile partner, the enforcer, the man nobody could control. He worked for Capone and got fired. He worked with Dillinger and got frozen out. And he was useful until he became a liability. And in this life, once you become a liability, you become a target. The bulletproof vests didn't save him. The Thompson submachine guns didn't save him. The fast cars and the loyal wife and the gang of hardened criminals, none of it mattered in the end. The illusion of invincibility is always just that, an illusion. So why does the record still stand? More FBI agents killed than any individual in history. Nearly a century and no one has matched it. Not because Nelson was smarter, not because he was more skilled, because he was willing to die rather than stop fighting. Because when the moment came, he walked forward. His mother, Mary Gillis, offered the gentlest possible epitaph. Lester really wasn't a bad boy. They made him like that. Historians largely disagree. But somewhere in that 5'4" frame, in that cherubic face, that explosive temper forged in Chicago's slums, that Christmas Eve when his father put a gun to his own head, was a boy who became a monster. And a monster who walked into the guns because he didn't know any other way. And so Lester Gillis rests. Not in the ditch where Chase dumped his body, but in a quiet cemetery in River Grove, Illinois, under the name his family gave him. Nelson was buried on December 1st, 1934. The funeral was held at Sadowski Funeral Home, 1845 North Hermitage Avenue in Chicago. Photographers captured his mother, Mary Gillis, sobbing over the casket, her youngest son, the only one who'd turned to crime, the only one who'd made the papers. He rests at St. Joseph Catholic Cemetery, now 3100 North Thatcher Avenue, River Grove, Illinois, Section C, Block 8, Lot 18. The headstone says Gillis, not Nelson, not Babyface, just the name he was born with. The grave is still there, visitable. Helen lies to his left, together again after 53 years apart. Every November, a few visitors still make the trip. They stand at the grave of a man who killed 3 federal agents, a man who walked into gunfire rather than surrender, a man whose violence helped build the very institution that hunted him down. They take photographs, leave flowers sometimes, and they wonder, probably, what he would have thought of all this, the attention, the legend, the record that still stands. Somewhere in the FBI's archives, the case files remain, the photographs of the body in that Skokie ditch, the autopsy reports. It's in the witness statements from the Battle of Barrington, the handwritten notes from agents who watched a man absorb 9 bullets and keep walking. 3 agents, 1 man, a 5'4" killer with a baby's face and a hole through his liver, walking forward until he couldn't walk anymore.